An invitation, and thank you all for taking time to come to this lecture. I want, before that we start, to also clarify one more thing. Everything that we make with the sale of the book doesn't go in my wallet. It goes straight in the lab for research for celiac disease and related disorders. So this is all, pro bono. What we're going to talk tonight is what has become probably a very fashionable topic in the past few years, the gluten-free diet. And there is a lot of confusion, and it's really leads to the concept of facts, fad, both, where we're talking about here. Just out of curiosity, how many of you guys are on a gluten-free diet? Okay, all right, wonderful. So, because this wants to be a conversational chat rather than an academic, lesson, I make this extremely informal. I will mix facts with fantasies without telling you which one are the facts, which one are the fantasies, so it's up to you to decide. My job will be to make everything sounds like factual, so we'll see if you can distinguish between one and the two. And I want to start with the concept where this problem comes from. It is kind of weird that now this, evil gluten came into the spotlight that seems to be responsible for so many things. But where this gluten and, this entire field come from? Well, let's put this in perspective. Humankind, for whatever we understand, has a span time history on the face of the earth of roughly 2.5 million years. So we've been during this period of time, it became the dominant, race and entity on the face of the earth in terms of beings. And during this 2.5 million years, we've been gluten-free for the vast majority of the time. Indeed, the diet of our species has been historically based on fruits, nuts, tubers, sometimes, very lucky times, meats, but very rarely, sometimes fish, and that was it. Something revolutionary that changed totally our history as a human being happened 10,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture. So our species dramatically changed the lifestyle from nomadic, moving around, trying to find food for survival, to settlers when they domesticate food and crops. This seems to be trivial said like that, but let me put this in perspective. A human being 20, 30, 100,000 years ago would spend 95% of his or her time for food procurement, 5% of the time for reproduction. That was it. The fact that you can domesticate food so it's predictable if and when food comes to your table unleashed the creativity that brought us to this museum today. If we were able to build the Colosseum, the Wall of China, the Eiffel Tower, was because we free up the time that was spent for food procurement for very creative activities. So that was not a trivial passage. It happened because this was not part of the history of evolution. It should not have happened. As a matter of fact, as you will see during this chat, as a species we're high disadvantage to other species. It took a meteor shower that killed the dominant species, i.e. the dinosaurs, to allow us to come down from trees and then to use 2 of the 4 arms. So the other 2 were freed up to build tools and then start this issue of the creativity. So the advent of agriculture, that is when gluten came into the picture, was a major milestone. Major milestone. So this extraordinary event was really the corner point for human evolution the way that we know now. How this materialized, how that happened. So how we moved from hunting, gathering lifestyle to agriculture. So what were the events that led to the development of agriculture? As far as we know, these events, let me go back, really come up with a major difference between men and women. So in other words, it's not that I want to capture my feminine, audience here, but really seems to be related to the acumen of women that made tremendous observation that made agriculture possible. And this is mainly due to the different kind of capabilities that the women's brain have compared to men's brain. Again, here I'm factual. So how many of our friend males here will remember the birthday of all your family members? How many of the women in the audience will remember the birthday of all your family members? Okay, I believe that's pretty clear. And this is due to the fact that man's brain works like on the top, and women's brains is a little bit more sophisticated. So men's, they have one single ship on and off. Women's, they have a little bit more of relay that can have, the redundancy to remember stuff that men would not remember. So everything started here. What is the actual Turkey? That's where the first settlers constructed the first city in the sense of established settling. And that's where agriculture probably took place. So how did it happen? Probably by a series of serendipitous events. The first one is that whatever I'm going to tell you happened right in that region. Very fertile region. Fertile Crescent was called. The temperature, the humidity, the rain, all the elements were right. Number one. Second serendipitous event. At that time, there was a huge catch of a very large animal that imposed these, hunters to stay put for a long period of time, for months, and not for the typical few days that they were settling for a place and then moving around, because there was enough food to stay put for that period of time. Serendipitous number 3. That brain relays the women's that I show you got in action. At that time, there was a clear division of duties in the community. Men were hunters, women were behind, taking care of the group in terms of the settlement and the kids and all 9 yards. And why the men were hunting, women made this observation because they were long enough there that from plants that were really shaken by wind, seeds would come in the ground. And from the place where the seeds went in the ground, another identical plant came up. That was the way that agriculture was born. If it was the men behind, number one, we would not have made the observation. Number two, even if we link the two phenomena together, we will wait for the next winds to come and shake the plant. While women's, they manually shake the plants, collect the seeds, put in the ground, and the next plant came up. This is the agriculture, the way that it was born. From there, to use a modern young folks term, these concepts of agriculture went viral. It would spread pretty much north to south, east to west, at a rate of roughly 0.8 miles a year. So it started there and went up that way. If you fast forward from 10,000 years ago to 2,000 years ago, when the major, civilization like the Egyptian civilization really took place and started to shape the humanity the way that we know it, you see that wheat and wheat products like making bread became a big issue. So much so that we see this in artifacts. And also, even before the Romans came up with wine, there was a much more sophisticated drink. Egyptians came up with beer using wheat as a source. So there was clearly the understanding that this was a big deal. And matter of fact, wealth at that time was not measured in stocks and bonds that we did not have, but two major commodities, wheat and oil. And the reason why they were so precious commodities, because they have characteristics that were unique. Not perishable, and you can make a lot of things with that. With wheat, again, you can make bread, you can make beer, and then eventually you can make other kind of products that came along during the evolution. With oil, you can eventually eat with that. We can light your place and so on and so forth. And this is the way that, again, the spread of agriculture happened over the years. So eventually, by the 4,000 or 5,000 BC, agriculture and therefore plants with wheat was pretty much present all over Europe. So with that preamble, how come that something that was so instrumental to make us whatever we are right now as a civilization became evil? So much so that now seems responsible for all ailments that affect humankind. No matter what's wrong with you, gotta be gluten, okay? So how come that this is what we're experiencing right now? And again, what is factual and what is actual, free interpretation of the facts? Well, in 1997, and again, here now, most of this history materialized through our Center for Celiac Research. And that's the reason why some of the stuff is in the book that we wrote, just to set the story straight, so to have a record keeping kind of evolution. Because when we start this journey, 1997, actually, we started the year before, nobody knew about celiac disease. People have no clue what wheat was. Most of my colleagues didn't know how to spell celiac, because it was something that was considered extremely rare, esoteric, affecting all young kids in North Europe, and that was it. And nobody else had this kind of problem. So what we learned was quite an interesting lesson. Celiac disease was described, at least seems to be the case, by a physician long time ago. Aradis from Cappadocia was a Greek physician that roughly 2,000 years ago provided a description really fits what celiac disease is all about. The link, though, between celiac disease and gluten happened only much later, thanks to this Dutch pediatrician, Dickey, that made a very interesting observation. You need to know that celiac disease was a very bad condition. 1/3 of the kids affected by celiac disease would not make it. Mortality 30-35%. So that was the destiny of these kids. If somebody was diagnosed with celiac disease, would be brought to the hospital, and the hospital doctor, confirming the diagnosis, would tell the parents, leave the kids over here, come back in 4 or 6 months. If he or she is alive, you can bring back home. And during these 4 or 6 months, these kids were exclusively fed bananas. That's the reason why they're called banana babies. There are very few still around of this generation of banana babies. Nevertheless, to say, if they make it through this awful journey, they will never ever want to see yellow again, no matter in which shape or form. Okay, yellow was not part of what they wanted. Then this guy made this very clever observation. During World War II, the mortality of kids with celiac disease went to 0. No kids were dying of celiac disease. As soon as the war was over, the mortality went back to the pre-war, rate, 30-35%. And the fellow reasoned that during the war, there was really shortage of wheat. As a matter of fact, flour was made with potato starch. And when the war was over, wheat was again available. Again, the potato starch was substituted again with wheat. So he put the two and two together and developed this hypothesis. To challenge that, he did something that today would be inconceivable. He took 6 kids, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and he put these kids on a gluten-free diet, showing that going on this diet, the symptoms went away. Then they put these kids back on a regular diet, showing that the symptoms came back. And he was able, with this kind of quote-unquote experiment, to prove the link between the exposure to gluten and the onset of disease. And this remains a cornerstone of the treatment of celiac disease. Never changed since 1952, when he published this paper. In 1948, he made the first observation. Fast forward 2014, we learned a great deal about this condition. So we know that this is not a food intolerance as we believed before, but it's truly an autoimmune disease. We know that this not does affect only kids, because anybody at any age can be affected. We know that this is not a premises of Caucasians, North American, North European, background. Anybody, no color, no matter what color of the skin you have, is at risk for developing celiac disease. And we know now that this is not rare, as we believed before, but affects roughly 1% of the general population. So it's one of the most frequent genetically based diseases of humankind. But one thing that we learned that was a mind-blowing lesson is this is truly an autoimmune disease. It's like having diabetes, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, you name it, but very, very peculiar. So much so that this is leading to major discoveries that one day may bring us to the solution of this other disease for which we don't have any treatment to offer. What is so special? Recipe the same. You gotta have genetic predisposition, because to have an autoimmune disease, you have to be genetically predisposed. You have to be exposed to an environmental trigger that is mismanaged by your immune system because of genetic predisposition. When you have the immune system that is genetically predisposed to not do its job right, what happens is when you're exposed to this enemy, rather to fight against them, you start to attack your own body. And depending what target you go after, you can develop, MS if you go after your brain, diabetes if you go after your pancreas, rheumatoid arthritis if you go against your joints, and if again you attack your intestine, you develop celiac disease. But why is so special? One, because the genes that are involved in celiac disease, some of them are known, and two of them, particularly the ones that you see there, HLA, DQ2, DQ8, they must be there. Without those, you cannot develop celiac disease. No other autoimmune diseases like this. The other peculiarity is the target of the autoimmune process is known. This strange enzyme that's called transglutaminase, or TTG, that we use for diagnostic purposes. But what really sets celiac disease aside from any other immune disease is the only autoimmune disease for which we know the trigger, that is gluten, this strange protein containing grains. So much so that if you stop this continued interplay between gene and this environmental trigger, in this case by putting these people on a gluten-free diet, all the autoimmune process shuts down completely. So much so that if you make the diagnosis on time and there are no consequences, the individual will have no symptoms, will not have autoantibodies, the destruction of the intestine, that is the autoimmune sign that something goes wrong, will be completely repaired. So this fellow will not be distinguishable from anybody else out there. I don't know if you appreciate what I just said, because this is still shaking the ground of science of autoimmunity, because we believe that autoimmunity, there is nothing you can do about it. Celiac disease is teaching us otherwise. If you find any way to stop this interplay between who you are, genetically speaking, and what surrounds you as an environment, you may stop autoimmunity, as we can do with celiac disease, knowing what is the instigator. And this is leading us to major, major discoveries in other autoimmune diseases. When this perfect storm comes together, this is what we had in mind as celiac disease. The classical presentation. Look very carefully at these kids. We see still kids like this, but only if we go in developing countries. These are the malnourished kids, the kids that don't have anything to eat. They look like this. And unfortunately, there are millions of kids that still look like this. Not celiac disease. We don't see this anymore. If we see anything like this with celiac disease, we take our iPhone, iPad, something, and we take a picture. We call our students, because we don't see this anymore. The reason why celiac disease look like this is these kids, there is a picture of kids in London in the 30s, they have everything that they need to eat, but they cannot make use of it because it would just go through. The intestine will not be able to digest, absorb foodstuff, and therefore they are malnourished, they are starving to death because the intestines cannot bring the stuff in. Why, kids, again, in developing countries, they look like this because they don't have food, period. But again, we were looking in this direction when we made the statement, celiac disease does not exist in the United States. And of course, it does not, because it does not exist anymore. The real celiac disease is this. In other words, it's something that can affect any tissue or organ or your body that you can imagine. The battlefield is the intestine. That's where the fight starts. That's where the collateral damage that we call inflammation that can lead to symptoms occurs. But sometimes these soldiers, they are the immune cells, they are fighting on the battlefield. For reasons that are not clear to us, we leave the battlefield and go somewhere else. Go to skin, and you have this itchy rash that we call it dermatitis perdiformis. We go to your bones, and you develop osteopenia, osteoporosis. We go to other places, and we develop problem with your brain, and so on and so forth. It suffices to say that while in the past the main clinical manifestation was the GI symptoms like diarrhea, weight loss, and so on and so forth, the main presentation nowadays of celiac disease is anemia and chronic fatigue and nothing else. No diarrhea, no constipation, no stomachache, nothing. And if you don't know that celiac disease can do that, you can spend months and months, years to find out what's wrong with you without a final diagnosis. So much so that in the past, in the 90s, the lag period between the onset of the symptom and somebody will make the diagnosis of celiac disease will be measured in years, 14, 16 years. That was the lag period. Now it's much better, but still unfortunately we count in years and not months. And that's unfortunate. And that's mainly due to the fact that this is a weird disease. It's extremely difficult to really diagnose. This is truly a clinical chameleon. Why something that is supposed to be good for us is so toxic that can lead to such devastating disease like celiac disease? What's wrong with this protein that we call gluten? Well, the beauty of this protein is that it's a one of a kind. Can do stuff that no other proteins can do. When we talk about gluten, actually it's a mixture of proteins, the gliadins and the glutenins and so on and so forth. This is a micrograph of what happened when you take wheat flour and you mix with yeast and water. You create these fibers that will eventually generate these chambers in which air is entrapped when you put yeast in the air that is fermented. And that's called dough. That's the reason why it puffs. And that's how you can make this beautiful bread, the croissant, the smelly stuff, and so on and so forth. If you try to do this with rice, we stay flat. With maize, we go nowhere. The puffiness is due to the elasticity and this unique capability of gluten to do this kind of stuff. That's the beauty. How this protein does that? Well, because again, it's a one of a kind, and here's the beast. Proteins can be compared to a sort of pearl necklace. There needs to be broken in pieces that we call peptides, and then the single pearls, they're called amino acids, and it needs to be peeled off. If you don't do that, you cannot digest them. Not only that, but the enemies to which the immune system reacts to that can eventually create this collateral damage that we call inflammation are proteins. And only proteins, they are undigested, or only partially digested, can instigate an immune response. What you see here is one of the key components of gluten. It's called alpha-gliadin. And the color-coded pieces are pieces that we are not able to digest. Because we didn't evolve to eat gluten, we do not have the enzymes, the scissors, to cut this into single pieces. We can at the best have these fragments undigested. And some of these fragments is being mapped up to do bad things. This guy here will kill cells, what we call apoptosis. This fellow here will induce a huge, exaggerated immune response that will create an inappropriate inflammation that can lead to symptoms. These two blue pieces here that communicate with the cell of the intestine has to release this molecule that Sarah was mentioning that's called zonulin that makes your intestinal leak. And by doing that, allow the rest of gluten, God knows what else, to come in your body to instigate the immune system to develop this immune response. And finally, this is the last kid that was discovered in the lab at the center that is able to attract soldiers on the battlefield. Soldiers are called neutrophils, a specific kind of immune cells that will set the stage for inflammation that characterize celiac disease and other gluten-related disorders. The third milestones, very excited. Now we start again 2.5 million years ago, we're in 2010, is that through celiac disease, as I told you, being such a one-of-a-kind model, we learn the unthinkable. The fact that you're born with genes for any kind of disease, particularly autoimmune disease, it doesn't mean that it's destiny that you develop it. If you do or do not, depends on who you are in terms of behavioral, social, local, or geographical reality. So in other words, the environment will have a tremendous amount of say if your genetic predisposition will translate in disease or not. And again, we learn this through celiac disease. We are in the midst of autoimmune disorders. There is an epidemics of autoimmunity. You see here in only half a century what we have been doing to ourselves in terms of this rampage of asthma, MS, Crohn's disease, diabetes, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is way too short period of time to consider that this is due to genetic mutation. Rather, many investigators, when this phenomenon was highlighted, thought that this was due to what we call the hygiene hypothesis. Do you guys know what the hygiene hypothesis is? No. Okay. I don't have the time because it's only 45 minutes. I will give you the short version. Once upon a time, there was something that was called backyard. Backyard? All right. The ones that are my age may remember that. The younger one may not remember that. Backyard was the place where kids used to go playing. Not supervised. So they had the freedom to put their hands on the ground, and then on the mouth, and then on the ground, and then the butt, and then the mouth, and then the mouth. By doing that, they were training big time their immune system to be strong and fight enemies. Now, we do not have the backyard. Kids, they play on a couch. The entertainment is a whatever box is called. Now I've lost my sense. Whatever. Okay. But that's it. And if you attempt to sneeze or to eat something without washing your hands, it's going to be this storm of people coming on you and make you shame that they even try to do that. That's the hygiene hypothesis. So we made ourselves too clean, and therefore our immune system is not trained anymore to fight these enemies. This hypothesis now is shaking a little bit. And this was also based, on the fact that why we see this in industrialized countries, people that continue to live a lifestyle the way that we evolved, i.e. developing countries in which, the kids are out there, 6-7 months they crawl on the ground, where animals and human beings, they live, they put poop of the animals in their mouth and so on and so forth. They don't have this. They have other fish to fry, so they have infections, but they don't have autoimmunity, okay? But now that the hygiene, guidelines and been implemented there, and so there is an improved hygiene in developing countries, still they don't see this. So this is much more just to be clean as, lifestyle. We are doing something in our latitudes that these people are not doing, and I'll tell you in a moment what I believe that it is. This is another example that I set on aside from the others because one, autism right now is being put within the realm of autoimmunity, but also because this is absolutely a travesty. Because if you compare the shape of the uphill here with this here, and you see the timeline, 1975 to 2012, this is something that is scary. In only 25 years, we passed from 1 to 5,000 to the last numbers that we got from the CDC, 1 in 68. And consider that the male-female ratio of autism is 4 to 1. 1 in 4 males in the future will be lost to our society because of autism. What the heck we're doing to our environment to do this? What is going on? So what is driving this? And again, once again, celiac came to rescue to try to help us to answer the question. Again, this is a condition in which we knew everything. We were sure that we had everything under control. You're born with the genes. You introduce gluten when baby food is introduced, the first year of life. That's the time in which disease starts. And our sense was, if you develop celiac disease as an adult, It's because you start as a baby and the disease went silent for a long time to clinically materialize in your adulthood. And then a study like this from our center come out. These are the same 3,000 judged mouse following for 50 years and see the disease in this cohort double every 15 years. There were people that have been able to eat gluten, undisputable the culprit of autoimmunity, for 40, 50, 60 years and stay healthy. And then all of a sudden something happened to them and they lost the capability to tolerate gluten and they developed celiac disease. Amazing, isn't it? So the question is, what happened to our body and specifically our immune system to switch from tolerance, I stay healthy, to the immune response that brings to autoimmunity? Because you answer that question, now you have the holy grail of solution of autoimmunity and God knows what else. So yes, the genes are all necessary. The environmental trigger is necessary, but they are not sufficient. There is something else that drives these epidemics of autoimmune diseases. And here's the list that, at least for celiac disease, we come up with to try to make sense of what seems to be inconceivable. Quality of grains, gluten, never changed in the past. No matter what you read in newspapers, very sensational and so on and so forth. I just was at the Academy of Science in Washington, D.C. to give a talk. There were smart people there. I mean, this is the National Academy of Science. This is the cream of the crop. Agronomists, they said there is no such a thing as engineered wheat out there. There is engineered, rice, engineered maize, but there is no engineered wheat that is commercially available. The only wheat out there comes from academia, and it's just purely the breeding of different seeds. The last permutation happened 300-400 years ago. So these epidemics that we've seen in the last 50 years cannot be driven by changing the quality of gluten. Quantity of gluten, breastfeeding, timing of introduction of gluten, they are all being told that there can be possibilities. But the paper that we just published, in October 2014, a huge enterprise published in New England Journal of Medicine, in which we followed 700 kids for 10 years at risk for celiac disease. It taught us a great lesson that was shocking to us. Breastfeeding, it does not protect. Sadly so. Of course, breastfeeding is good for many other things, but having gluten introduced while you breastfeed, that we thought that was the best way to induce tolerance, it didn't work. Delayed introduction of gluten, it does not help. It just delayed the onset of the disease. Giving very tiny small amount of gluten early in life so that you train your immune system to tolerate it, it didn't work. The only thing that seems to be instrumental is that GI infections in the first year of life, with or without antibiotic treatment, is the only thing that seems to make a difference, i.e. that increase your risk to develop celiac disease. Another high risk is if you have a high load of these HLA genes. The more of the copies of these genes you have, the more the risk will go up. That brought us to what I believe that doesn't need any introduction anymore. Because if you don't know what the microbiome is, you're really out of this world. There is no TV shows, there is no newspaper, there is no magazine that will not inundate with this crap, because literally that's what we're doing about it. So the microbiome is become so much fashionable. And we didn't know about this, because we didn't have the technology to understand it. But now we have the capability to understand the existence of a parallel civilization that was completely oblivious to us. And this is probably what is the mechanism that is taking over the hygiene hypothesis. This is something that we put forward 2-3 years ago. Everything is driven not by the fact we're too clean, but we're eating very differently. Very, very differently the way that we evolved. Think about this. 2 generations ago, your grandparents, they did not have a refrigerator. They have to consume what was locally produced. There were no preservatives. They were not, trailed in the frozen section of the supermarket to put in the microwave. So what we're putting in our mouth, God knows what it is. We have no idea. Because, when you don't cook yourself, and you got something cooked for you, All the bets are on the table there. And, we don't know exactly what this can do to us. Colorants, preservatives, chemicals, fillants, we don't know. We don't know. Forget about the genetically engineered stuff. My generation, and again, I hate to do that because that means I'm old, and I am. We really had the luxury to have strawberries in July and August. I don't remember that strawberries were available in January. And definitely, they came in all shape and color. You go to the supermarket, you got the strawberries, same color, same size. It's 12 months a year, and you wonder what this stuff comes from. And if it comes from a different country, how they've been, preserved to come to our table, they are not perished. I did not know what was a kiwi until a few years ago. Never heard what it was a kiwi. And if you have a salad, a fruit salad without a kiwi, you really are moron nowadays. So you got to have kiwi. But anyhow, so nutrition changed. The microbiome, by definition, was affected by this change because they eat whatever we eat. They are in there, so they eat the leftover that we put in our mouth. There is now strong evidence that the immune system is highly, highly influenced by the microbiome, particularly in the first 3 years of life. So a balanced, healthy, friendly microbiome will shape our immune system to defend us. And an healthy, unbalanced, belligerent microbiome is the one that can set the stage for our immune system to hurt us rather than defend us, provided you have a genetic predisposition. So I'm going to wrap it up and finish by saying, guys, we know that we're at the top of the line here. We know that we're very sophisticated. But when the Human Genome Project was completed, that we really learned that we're made by only 25,000 genes, at least myself, the self-esteem went to the toilet. 25,000 genes. That's it. We are the most rudimental genetic entity on the face of the earth. A worm has 90,000 genes. The one that we go fishing, 90,000 genes. The plant that make gluten, wheat, 150,000 genes. We have only 25,000 genes, that's all. And there are only 400 genes, the difference between us and chimpanzees, 950 between us and a mouse. This is it. And I don't feel like a mouse. And I work with chimpanzees. I cannot engage in a political discussion with the chimpanzees or complain about the snow in Boston. They will not engage in that kind of discussion. So how come that we're so complex in the face of rudimental genetic makeup? You can't answer the question unless you accept the fact that there is a parallel civilization that produces 100 times more genes than we do, that for each cell of your body you have 10 bacteria that live with you, that are integral part of what we are. Because we are born from the beginning moment in which we come out at once to live in this symbiosis. And we will be with these people until we die. And then we take care of us by eating our body when we're gone. This is it. I mean, guys, this is the reality of the story. So they will survive us big time. So the bottom line is, this is what we live, and probably it is the modification of the microbiome that can eventually be the factor that put us out of the edge and will create the problem. So what is now the situation, the gluten-free diet and so on and so forth, going back to gluten freedom and so on and so forth? Because we know that the culprit for celiac disease is gluten, the gluten-free diet is the only treatment. So you take these grains containing gluten out of your diet and everything's fine. Easy to say, very difficult to implement. We know there are other forms of gluten reaction, like this gluten sensitivity, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, very new kid on the block. There's not autoimmunity, but still people eating gluten with this condition will develop symptoms. Remains the only treatment for these people. We don't know how strict, though, they have to be compared to the celiacs. They have to be totally strict. We don't know if this will stay for long, for the entire life, like celiac disease, or you can grow out of it. We have no idea. But let's go back to the real story of our genetic complexity. Based on what I told you about the microbiome, most likely we're made by two genomes. The human genome, the ones that come from mom and dad, the 25,000 genes that if they have a defect, let's say predisposition to celiac disease or Alzheimer or colon cancer or breast cancer or multiple sclerosis, they are there. But that is not destiny that you will develop it. If you do or you do not, depend on this other parallel secondary genome, the microbiome, that comes, if you're lucky, from your mother. Because if you are born by vaginal delivery, she will give you the microbiome that she's living in peace with, and most likely, because genetically similar, will live in peace with us. This is factual. If you're born by C-section, you have 4 or 5 times higher risk to develop celiac disease than you're born by vaginal delivery. Why? Because the microbiome is very different. This is the microbiome of our mother, far away from here. Now, if you are born naturally, the vaginal microbiome, that is this one in red, will be the one that will be passed to you together with the gut microbiome. So this is the microbiome of the kids. They are born by vaginal delivery in pink. But if you're born by C-section, your microbiome, that is the one in light blue, will be identical or close to the skin microbiome of our mother. And there they are bad guys and good guys, because they're not being accepted to live with her. They just sit there because they are in the environment. So it can be the microbiome come from the nurse or the obstetrician or any other people in the hospital. And do not belong to that body. It's not being accepted as friendly. It's just landing there. But now it's inhabiting your guts because you're born by C-section. So to finish up and to explain what is a little bit difficult, the human genome is a sort of piano with 25, 30,000 notes. Each is one gene. And let's say that to play the song celiac disease, you have to strike 300 these notes. If you have a defective piano, you can't trade in. It's there. But if you play the song celiac disease or not, depends on the piano player. And the piano player is the microbiome. The piano will never change. The piano player does. So it depends who sits at the piano. You have different kind of music that you can play. Let's say that you're born by vaginal delivery, that you've been healthy the first year of life. You didn't have infection. You didn't have any antibiotic treatment. Everything is fine. Most likely you have somebody that would not touch all 300 notes. Let's say Elton John. They play pop music, touch 2 of the 300 notes. You stay healthy. Then you have an infection. Then you take a trip to Cancun and get nuts. Or you have a surgery. Or you have to take antibiotics. Now, Chopin is sitting there. He's a virtuoso. And he can touch all 300 notes at any age. Any age. And now, you sing the song and play the song celiac disease. What I just explained you is the concept of epigenetics. How, with a very limited number of genes, you have infinite permutation. And this is all environmental pressure. And if this theory that we developed through celiac disease will hold true, now we have a key to eventually resolve the problem, because you can know well in advance the music that has been played. You know that if you don't hear pop music anymore, but you eat classic, that means the wrong microbiome is sitting there, and eventually you can intervene before that the storm comes to your the doorsteps. And that's what we're doing now. We have done some pilot studies in which we know that kids with celiac disease, before they develop the disease, they have an increase of some of these molecules, these metabolites, that are telling us in 6 months down here, this kid, because of this profile, will develop celiac disease. So I know that this is the kid that I have to intervene on. And this is the mega study that we're doing here in MGH. There is a multi-center study worldwide that we coordinate that is called the CDGEM, in which we recruit infants at risk of celiac disease from all over the world to try to expand this proof of concept to reality, because we want to implement what we call personalized medicine. I know that you are going down this path. I will stop it. This is the Holy Grail. This is really the Holy Grail. So I'm going to finish up talking a little bit about what are we with the, Sarah, what are we with the time here?
Okay, 2 more minutes, sure.
5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, so The gluten-free market in the past 10 years absolutely exploded. Here are 3 different diets: low-carb diet in yellow, fat-free in blue, gluten-free diets in blue, in red, gluten-free diets in blue, and you see that since 2008, the gluten-free diet took over and never looked back. It is by far the most popular diet ever in the United States. You take the South Beach diet, the North Beach diet, the Paleo diet, the West Beach diet all together, and you don't got even close what's going on here. So we talk about the multi-billion dollars, enterprise here that is most definitely driven also by the fat diet. When you see celebrities, they go gluten-free because they want to cleanse their body. When you see politicians, that they do the same. When you go to California and 98% of the population is gluten-free, you better know that something is not really right, okay? However, said that, this is not a fat diet by any stretch of imagination. There is a fat component. But for people with celiac disease, the gluten-free diet is like insulin for diabetics. No joke. They don't have the flexibility to be gluten-free, yes or no, like paleo diet or the South Beach diet. They don't. So there is definitely a fat factor, but this is not a fat diet. There's a big difference between the two. So a very interesting survey seems to suggest that by the end of 2012, beginning 2013, 1 over 3 Americans in trying a gluten-free product, roughly 100 million people. Who the heck are these people? I mean, the top that we can reach if we want to say this is driven by celiac disease is 3 million. That's the predicted number of people that affect the celiac disease in the United States, and only a fraction of them has been diagnosed. So, who are these people? The vast majority of people that embrace the gluten-free diet nowadays do because the diet is healthier. There is somebody that say there that you go gluten-free, you will be a much healthier diet. Now, it depends what we define gluten-free. If you define gluten-free that you eat everything that you want, that you use substitutes of gluten containing elements like gluten-free pasta, pizza, beer, and so on and so forth, that's not a healthy diet at all. Okay, it is not. It's hypercaloric. It's definitely something that is not healthy. If on the other hand, you intend as a gluten-free diet, the diet in which you cook yourself, you buy products and you cook yourself, so you're sure that it's gluten-free, as we used to do, for 99.9% of our evolution. Yeah, maybe. So no junk food. You can't go to the drive-through anymore. That's it. You can't go to the freezer program and freezer section and take whatever, stick in the microwave, and that's your dinner. Yeah. So definitely depends what the definition you give you. Now, 24 million people, they go gluten-free because they believe that they lose weight. Once again, what do you mean for gluten-free diet? If you have substitutes, will you gain weight? You don't lose weight because you take gluten out, you got to put something in. Guess what you put in? Sugar and fat. Because otherwise this stuff will be awful. So to make them palatable, you got to beef it up with the other stuff. The last 3 groups are the ones that are very interesting. 9 million people, roughly, they claim that they have to go gluten-free because they have GI symptoms and otherwise they don't go away. Another 7 million, they say they have to go gluten-free because they have mainly extra GI symptoms that will not go away unless they go gluten-free. The last piece of the cake here, you can't see it, it's a line, are the 300,000 people now, roughly 350, that have been diagnosed with celiac disease and definitely need to be on a gluten-free diet for sure because they need to do that. So now, for what we understand, the gluten spectrum disorder is divided in 3 groups. Once you see the people that have the medical necessity, because the ones that don't have medical necessity, these are the occasional consumers that I told you have no business to be gluten-free. With allergy, roughly 0.1% of the population, so allergic reaction to wheat. Celiac disease, the autoimmune reaction, roughly 1%, and the remaining gluten sensitivity or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, that's roughly 6% of the general population. That's pretty much the breakdown. So there are some nutritional aspects of the gluten-free diet that needs to be considered. You can try, because this is an medical intervention. When you go gluten-free, you can miss important nutrients, fibers, iron, vitamins, calcium, phosphorus, zinc. So if you go gluten-free, you better do this under the supervision of a dietitian, and after that, you really consider that this is beneficial for you under the advice of a physician. So you need to be mindful about that. So nutrition assessment, the physical findings, history, and so on and so forth are all important. And the quality of life on a gluten-free diet can be negatively affected. So you will go for it if you have a return on investment. But this is just for fashion. Keep in mind that there are social and economic implications. The availability of gluten-free food is not everywhere, so you can't just stop somewhere if you're hungry and buy something, a bite to eat. There are religious considerations. Waffle, they have to be gluten-free. When you travel, is a problem because restaurant, school, and hospital may or not accommodate your needs. There is definitely barrier of compliance. The diet is considered too restrictive because gluten is everywhere. It's uncomfortable in social setting because you have to feel different and you have to put yourself aside the others. Sometimes it's difficult. Some people they say tasteless. Some people they say that's too expensive. So in summary, to wrap it up, gluten definitely can trigger celiac disease and other immune-mediated disorders like wheat allergy and non-celiac gluten sensitivity. These three forms of gluten-related disorders can overlap clinically, so you can't distinguish just by saying, oh, since I have stomachache, I have this rather than that. The prevalence of celiac disease and wheat allergy is well established because we have the biomarkers. Gluten sensitivity, we don't know for sure. And the diagnosis of wheat allergy and celiac disease is based on specific blood tests followed by the confirmation. For non-celiac gluten sensitivity, we don't have such a thing yet. So the gluten-free diet remains right now the cornerstone of treatment these disorders, with the caveat and the opportunity that new development are on the horizon, i.e. alternative or integrative treatment to the gluten-free diet. That will be an object of discussion at the FDA in 2-3 weeks. So before, that's the last thing that I want to tell you. If you really think that gluten bothers you, do not give it a try, because the way that you engage with this diet is very different if you have celiac disease compared to gluten sensitivity with allergy. You got to really find out first in which part of the spectrum you are before that you embrace your gluten-free diet. Because otherwise, once you go gluten-free, the tools to put you in one of the 3 spots will be gone and the diagnosis cannot be finalized. So Sarah, I think that this is more than enough. I really squeezed 20 years of history. I want to challenge you if you can point out what I told you was factual, what was fantasy. Thank you so much for coming tonight.